The question in my mind is, how do you create or relaunch a highly profitable and successful 6 to 7 figure business? With so much conflicting advice about the best ways to start and grow your business, how do you get it right the first time? I want to help entrepreneurs make a real difference and navigate the messy world of startup or relaunch. My name is John North, and this is the Startup Secrets for Entrepreneur Show. Join me today when we dig deep with our guests and get you the best blueprint so you can fast track your own business. This episode is sponsored by Evolvepreneur.app, your all-in-one online business system. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes at startupsecrets.show right now. So let's get into today's episode.
Hi, my name is Roderick Mason. I'm the owner of Holistic Coaching Solutions, and I am on the Startup Secrets podcast. Please watch. We discuss secrets about starting up your company. We also have very interesting conversation and information on things you should know or things you'd want to know before you start up your company. So please give a listen, and hope to see you soon.
So my very special guest today is Roderick Mason, who's a holistic coach. So welcome, Roderick, to the show.
Thank you, John. Great to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Cool. So we like to learn some stuff on the show today. So we're going to ask you some deep questions. So I guess the first question is, what was your previous life? Because I mean, obviously, most entrepreneurs used to do something, and now they do this, and they've kind of had this epiphany along the way. It's like, oh, I've changed. I mean, I just finished an interview with Rocky, who had worked really hard all his life and then decided to sort of retire and start a business. But his focus is very different to what it used to be when he was working like 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And so, so how did you get to be a holistic coach? Like, what was the journey there?
Before becoming an entrepreneur, I worked probably 25 years in sales. So I worked various sales positions, did that, and the pivotal point was working for companies that kept going out of business. They paid great while you were working, but inevitably they all went out of business. So I worked for, I want to say, about 2 or 3 companies. You come in, they're doing great. One company, checks start bouncing, writing was on the wall. You go to another company, everything is great, and then suddenly they figure out it's just not working.
So lack of control at the end of the day. I mean, I used to rent houses when I moved like 13 times in 13 years when I was younger, and basically what drove me crazy was landlords. And business owners are kind of the same kind of thing. At the end of the day, like, you've got no control over it, so you almost like you're on that train, but you don't know where you're on that train, right? It could be a train wreck.
See it, yeah, and you're trying to help, and I think this is where my entrepreneur, because some of the times you saw the writing on the wall, you saw what they were doing wrong, and you're going, well, if you would only do this, and maybe once or twice I spoke up and thought, well, have you considered this? Because you realize things aren't working. They made me privy to, I had access to basically our quarterlies and what the monthly day-to-day operation costs and what the target number should be. When they realized they weren't hitting it, and they immediately, if you're sales, they immediately start blaming you. You're not bringing in enough sales. Well, you aren't putting them in a position to make the sales that would put this company over the top. And so.
And that's interesting too. I mean, I think being involved in businesses that fail are a good educational thing down the track, right? So I think, I used to do accounting software like years in a previous life, and basically we implemented 500, 600, 700 accounting systems. And when you delved into a business and you really looked at it and you thought, gee, I could change your business, but the owner's not listening. And so he's either doesn't want to listen, or he's got so far deep into the hole that it doesn't matter anymore. Like, at some point it becomes irrecoverable, and he's got himself in that hole and he can't dig himself out of it. And isn't willing to make the hard decisions, so they're just going to let the whole thing fall apart around them rather than, fiddle while Rome burns, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens. One particular situation, the owner, I worked at a very high-end audio store, and it was basically his toy store. So, okay. and if you could imagine,
bought himself a job.
Yeah, he did, but it for lack of a better word, it was almost like a Ponzi scheme, because what would happen is I'd bring in these huge sales. He would take, instead of ordering the customer's merchandise, he would go order something for himself, wait for another customer to come in, give him,
okay,
and then fulfill that order. So yeah, it kind of became a mess.
Yeah, I mean, sooner or later you get caught out. I mean, there was a case in Australia just recently where this Ponzi scheme of $250 million and had been going for 16 years. And it actually, what he was doing was essentially taking new investor money, and he'd paid everybody on time for their returns, like 15% returns. But he's taking the money from the money that he got from new investors to pay the existing investors' interest. So they all thought it was cool because they were getting paid, so they thought their investment was safe. And when it got to the end, there was like $15 million when they finally got reported to ATSIC and starts to get investigated. There's no money left because he's been giving it all back.
Yeah.
And that's a business in some respects, right? The money comes in, the money goes out, and it doesn't necessarily stick. We're actually talking about that in the previous episode, actually, about, that revenue is vanity, right?
It really is. And in his case, yeah, we certainly see that.
Sanity. So that was quite an interesting saying. So holistically, and I think we spoke of before, was that your focus is non-tech, right? So your focus is the person, right? Holistically, the person in the business.
The businesses, yes.
They're doing. So how does that look like in a normal circumstance, and particularly with a small entrepreneur that's kind of starting up? What's that look like? Maybe they hire a couple of people, remote people, for example.
Well, since my background has been retail, a lot of in retail, what I do is help them, especially now, as more retail establishments try and bring employees back. We do mock scenarios so that they can get comfortable with the situation. We also try and help them not get in their own way, get out of your way, that type of thing. Too often people get stuck in their head that there's only one way to do something. And so we try to show them that there are multiple ways. And as you said before, don't be afraid to pivot. And what you quickly learn with so many entrepreneurs, particularly startups, is that coming up with a business plan is great, and you should definitely have one, but you should not be afraid to deviate if that plan fails to produce the results you want. The other thing we tell them is stop taking advice from people who haven't been down the path you're headed.
Yep.
If
well-meaning friends, right?
Yeah, and family sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes your biggest critics are just
as they'll say,
in the bloodline,
in your own town.
Yeah, and so we try and talk to them about that. We also talk about, especially if you're bringing on employees, be slow to hire and quick to fire, because too often, if a business ramps up really quick, people become desperate and they'll just bring in anybody to fill a seat. I mean, literally just a body to fill a seat.
Yeah.
And when that isn't working out, they feel, well, I've got someone, I don't want to go through the process of interviewing again. Don't be afraid of that. You've got to set aside that time. If you're going to build the right team, if you're going to have a successful business, building that team is crucial. And having that wrong person on the team that could potentially tank the business or cause a lot of problems that you're just not equipped to handle could be devastating to a business. So we talk to them about, again, slow to hire, quick to fire. It sounds somewhat cruel, but it's for the best. When you get the right employee, it's going to create the best culture, and you want that employee who's excited to come to work, who loves what they do, and they will brag on the company. So,
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had, I think I almost look at it upon a cancer in your business. Like you get one person who starts being negative and starts drilling around wants to prove a point. They're super dangerous. I mean, I could write a book about all the things that happened when I was running my Sage business, but what we didn't realise at one point is we hired support people, and turns out that the couple of people in support were actually cultures that clashed a lot. And because Australia's got nearly 200 different, or over 200 cultures or nationalities represented here.
right.
And so we didn't even know that we'd actually put together two cultures that actually had been at war with each other essentially for centuries in other countries. And even though they were still young, they had that fallback of, this person isn't what we like. And they'd having these fights and these things were going on. And it took us a while to figure this out. And we either had to separate them or fire someone. But then you've got to make a decision about, well, who's at fault here, right? Who's causing the most amount of trouble? And then we actually had monitored chats between a couple of staff that were sisters, and the stuff they were saying, like, it's like, they had to go. But we couldn't say that we saw that stuff because that was against the law to read those messages, but they were inside our own business on our own messaging solutions. So it wasn't like they were external. But we had to get rid of them because our reality was they were causing massive problems in the business. They were going to tank that business. And being mindful of that and being aware of what's going on, we caught that fairly early because women are far more sensitive to this stuff. They pick stuff up, at a gut feeling level that guys tend to just vamp over the top of, right? They just I should be right. They'll figure it out. But women pick it up. And I had two female managers and they were very sensitive to it. They'd pick up things and go, I don't feel this is right. And I think that's the thing with all this, like you say, fast to hire, slow to, to hire and fast to get rid of them. I think once you get that gut feeling you've got a problem, you got to make sure you take some action. I mean, we had a situation where we had like 7 consulting staff, and I said, you guys need to follow these processes and these rules. If you don't follow these rules, we're not going to make any money. And they just kept on asking for more and more money, and they just didn't do what they were told. And I said, if you don't do what we're told, I will fire you. Anyway, one day I lined 7 of them up in a row and fired them all at once, one after each other. Because that was the end of it. Because the problem was, because the cancer had got into that scenario, that none of these staff were ever going to change, right? Because everybody else had got in their ears, and I wasn't able to reinvent that thing. So we just said, look, we're just going to reset this thing and get rid of the staff that actually, because they're not making any money, and ultimately, they're never going to pay any attention. So it was almost like I had to take massive action there and almost shut down a division, rather than sort of keep a couple people on and limp along and hope for the best, because I could see that was never going to work.
Yeah, ironically, what's really weird, and people will experience this, and maybe some other people watching the podcast will be able to chime in. The strange thing is toxic employees will stay through anything. The good ones are the ones who will bail because the environment's simply too toxic. And then what ends up happening is when you hire new people, they take their cues from the toxic people, and then it's a never-ending cycle. So you've got to be quick to nip it in the bud, recognize it, and move on, and don't be afraid.
Control your destiny and create a complete business system for your online business. Evolvepreneur.app offers an easy and cost-effective way to build your online business by helping you avoid the pain and stress of implementing multiple systems, giving you the freedom to automate and scale. Support our sponsor by grabbing a free copy of Startup Secrets for Entrepreneurs at evolvepreneur.app. So is your clients typically like where the employees are face to face in a work environment, or are they remote workers? Like, what's your typical?
Lately, it's been more retail. Typically, I had gotten more not for profit. It hasn't been B2C. It's been B2B or people who perform services for behind the scenes for other companies. Now, there seems to be a huge one. One of the questions we're being asked is a lot of people, and I'm hoping none of your viewers are experiencing this, but one big problem is employers are going through hiring new employees, and now that things are opening back up, they're hiring employee potential employees are making the appointments, they're filling out all the paperwork, and then when the interview comes along, they bail or they ghost the interview. They're not showing up. The other issue is that one particular client interviewed 65 people and only 6 passed the background and drug test.
Wow.
So, and I'm telling some of them because depending on what state they're in, at least here in the United States, you may have to reconsider that drug test thing, because with marijuana becoming legal in a lot of American states, that maybe go back to the company that performs your drug testing and tell them, look, that's legal here. So you may have to reconsider. And then you just simply have to pay attention, because if that person's toxic or that person's just not a good fit for the company, then go ahead and fire them. But at this point, I think companies are going to, at least here in America, are going to have to reconsider the drug testing policies.
And I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's same with Olympics, that some of the tests of some of these drugs come up aren't really that lethal, or like they're not really that sort of drugs you expect. So, I mean, obviously they're testing for certain things, but like you said, like marijuana is legal in California, right? So basically, I heard that the banks, the biggest problem with marijuana is those businesses, the banks won't let them bank the money, and so
Yeah, well, because it's not federally, it's not legal federally, and the banks are federally insured. The banks can't take the money, so yeah, it's a problem.
It creates a whole new ballgame of problems, It's like
yeah.
So I mean, I think that's I know in Australia there's a certain level of drug testing. I've seen, my wife works for a business that's actually they routinely do drug tests, and it's like, well, you've got to look at a situation where you're suddenly controlling people's lives a lot as well, in terms of what they what they do out of business. But then those drugs could be affecting your business as a risk level. So it's a very fine line between, in that scenario, I think, in a ethical, moral and ethical scenario, if they're on a really, they're taking really serious drugs, then you don't want them in your business, right? Because they're going to cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between someone who's taking, a CBD to help them sleep at night, or for pain relief, and the heroin addict showing up to work every day. And
they're very good at covering up. So at the end of the day, it's like the situation. So where do you get your customers right now? What's your ideal customer, and where do you intend to get them from?
My ideal avatar would just be a corporation that is looking to improve its culture, looking to put itself out there in terms of a top company to come and work for. Most of them are coming right now through referrals. There are some job boards or message boards that people are asking questions, and you go in and you give them just a little bit of what you would do in a particular situation, and then as they become intrigued as to how you would solve that situation, that's how I'm landing some. So,
right.
But a bulk of them are through referrals, and as we begin to solve more of the retail problems, more retail stores, and they tend to run in the same circles. So
it's birds of a feather flock together.
Yeah, and it's been quite productive. Yeah.
And most of those kind of scenarios, they're very close knit. Like, there's not as many as you think there are in certain industries. So you end up in a situation where everybody knows everybody, and you don't necessarily have to break through that. And so one of the things that's interesting so where do you see yourself going? And then, like, this is only fairly new business now. Like, how long have you been doing this?
This has been since 2019. I've owned So this right now I see there's a lot of potential there, because companies, people are seeing through the veil of some companies, and so as the veil gets pulled back and companies are being exposed for bad corporate culture. We had one professional sports team here just recently were court mandated for new training and diversity, inclusion, and equity training, because the environment was so toxic. There was bullying, there was sexual harassment, there were all kinds of things that were going wrong in the company for this, well, the back office, I should say, for this particular sports team. And so that type of thing, I think, is going to only get worse as more people start to speak out about the corporate culture of the teams, or just large corporations in general. When you're talking about these multi-billion-dollar companies, I think you'll see more of it.
And you had asked the question why, I think a lot of it comes from the top down at the end of the day. Like it seems like, as you said, someone comes into the business and they see a toxic environment, they think that's normal, so they all start copying each other. And I remember when I started working in the bank, I was only 15, and this woman that was essentially my supervisor who'd been there a long time, and she was toxic. Like, she was very negative, very nasty, almost like I was taking her job away from her. She'd do everything possible, throw me under the bus at every opportunity. And I'm thinking, how can I get, like, this is my first job. I'm only like 15, 16. She's like 26 or something. So she's old. Right? And my son says, he's 21, they're old. So it's like, no, you're not. But anyway. And I'm thinking to myself, and this is a very small working environment. There's a manager, there's a teller, there's a like a general manager kind of thing, and me. I'm the trainee. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get through this? I'm going to end up killing her. So she's nasty, right? She would actually deliberately do stuff that actually get me into trouble. Yeah, and I was thinking, this isn't bad, right? So what I decided to do was, she had a problem because she had just had a baby. She's just come back, and she had a problem back in the days of VHS videos. She had a problem with the VHS player, and I was a bit techie. So I go, I'll help you. I'll fix that for you, right? I'll come around, I'll fix it for you. So I come around and I push the lid in, like the old VHS players where you have the little lip. Nobody knows about this anymore. Like, it's like explaining something like, what's a telephone, right? Anyways, I push it in and I pull my finger and I pull out a spoon. And so what had happened was the baby had managed to stick a spoon. Well, they always do this. Spoons, plates, all sorts of interesting things used to land in there. Right? Yeah. Because it's just like, oh, this is a slot I'll stick stuff into.
Like let me see what I can find to stick in here.
Anyway, so beautiful player works, right? From that day forward, I was the best thing in the world. Like, the whole attitude changed, and the entire working environment changed out of one thing, because I went and helped her. And my mum said to me at the time, why are you helping this person? Because, she's so nasty to you. And it's like, oh, I'm just going to try see if I can open communication and try to actually get into her head a little bit and sort of make some friendship with her. And in the end, it worked. And I still to this day don't know why she was like that. I think she was just like that as default personality. I don't know.
I think you hit it. She saw you as a threat, and too often people do see the new employee as a threat, but especially if they think the employee doesn't line up with their way of thinking. And that's another thing we try and tell people, think outside of the box when you're hiring. You don't have to have all like-minded individuals on the same team. There's a lot of advantage to having people with diverse thought and different ways of seeing things, because the way you would choose to solve a problem, someone may see a potential hazard in that process, and that could be beneficial. So that's just another thing we try and add to the table.
One of the things we used to do when we had like 23 staff or more, when someone went through the interview process, and people who didn't ask about the money were the ones that got to the end of the interviews. So what would happen is they'd come in, we'd do the interviews with them, and then we'd ask them to come in for half a day to sit with our existing staff and go around the business and get to know people. And what they didn't really know was that the staff were voting on whether they liked them or not. So we actually had them work through the whole thing, and they'd sit in the job they might be doing and talk to the person they're dealing with, and then they'd take them around the business, and then the end of it, we'd go back over the staff after they'd gone and say, what do you think of that person? Do you like them or didn't you like them? And some people go, look, they're bad news. Some of the stuff that they said to me while I was sitting with them was really bad. And so that was a very interesting way of kind of getting the staff involved, because when someone was hired on, it's almost like they voted them onto the island.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just one staff member. There had to be several staff members before we would even look at it. And then they'd hire them, and then at the end of the conversation, like, you're hired, they go, by the way, how much money am I getting? And that was interesting, because what it meant was they didn't start with the money. They started with the reason they wanted to work there. Right. They really wanted to work there. And so that way it was a way of stopping that kind of scenario where you get into the negotiation thing. So we'd say, look, we'd start you at a low salary. If you prove yourself, we'll increase your wages. And they were fine with that, and they'd start. And I always found if they really objected to the wages, they'd leave you because of the wages. That, they'd start with it, they'd leave.
Yeah, and I think that's why, some companies do credit checks. I think that's a little seedy, but I think they're trying to figure out, are you just coming on because you gotten in over your head with debt, and you're gonna dig yourself partially out of debt, and then as soon as a better opportunity comes along, you're gonna bail ship.
Yeah. I mean, that's so it's a lot of thought process, and as you said, like, I think hiring too fast is a dangerous thing, because what happens is you end up with a lot of people that should have never been there because you didn't put that thought process through it. And I think the early hires, the hard ones, like what we always said. It was interesting, actually. One of my clients said to me the other day, I was in this coffee shop and I spoke to this SEO guy that wants to work for me, right? And it's like, okay, so he's got all his skills. And I go, yes, he's got some skills, I said, but you don't have any employees right now. And so you're going to hire someone to do stuff we're actually doing for you anyway. But at the end of the day, you're hiring someone that you're going to have to manage. Did you think about that? And it's like, no. I said, and you're going to have to pay them, and you have to do all that work we're doing for you as part of what we do. I said, you should hire a general manager, like someone who actually manages your business first. And this was very interesting. I sort of thought that was an interesting way of running a business, because most entrepreneurs will hire the worker that's going to do all the work, and then lump all the work they don't want to do on them. And then they throw it back and go, I can't understand this, and I don't know how to do this, and so I'll do it myself then. And you end up thinking, hang on a minute, I just got conned here because I'm doing all the work. I'm working, really hard to pay these wages. The person doesn't want to do the job. And it's like, now you've got them and you're stuck with them because now they're in a business scenario where you can't get rid of them because it's your only employee. And I was like, the best advice I got was hire a general manager, and obviously got to find a way to help make money, but that general manager then hires everybody else. That general manager then manages everyone else, as opposed to, and they hire them, they fire them. That's what we used to have in our business when we had a couple of managers. If you hired them, you fired them.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think I tell some of the entrepreneurs, make sure you're interacting with them too, because what I've seen is managers will bring on, before you know it, you've got a slew of family.
The old family.
Yeah. So I tend to want to. There's some serious benefit to having that general manager and having them be responsible and giving them the autonomy to hire and fire and making sure that they're responsible while doing that. I think, you just have to be careful. Yeah,
absolutely. So where do you see yourself? So you're about a 5-year-old business-ish, I'm guessing, if the maths are right?
With this part of it, I'm just over 3 years. But what I see is in the next few years, being brought on for a various large corporate clients, and that's what I'd like to do. I would really like to see companies improve again the corporate culture. I think when you're seeing companies skirt so many loopholes, tax loopholes, and then still pay people, poverty wages, and then wonder why the turnover is so high, or why your company is on a list for one of the worst companies to work for. It can sustain itself if it's big enough, obviously, but wouldn't you rather have a company that people love to come in and work for? And so some companies you'll never get to. I'm not worried about that. But
probably better off without them.
Yeah. I mean, some of them are intentionally toxic because they follow that John D. Rockefeller. I don't want thinkers. I just want workers. Get in here and work.
Yeah. Industrialization, I guess.
Yeah. So, but I would, in the next 5 years, I would love to have an assortment of, large corporate clients that find the value in employees and want to have that corporate culture that draws new employees in so that they can retain their top talent and continue to acquire top talent.
So it's interesting because I hear that a lot, and I do this too, that you get a lot of business from client referral. And the danger of client referral is you can't control it, in theory. So what's happening is, I'll wake up in the morning and get an email saying this client's just referred me to someone else, you should talk to them. And typically that's a fairly easy sale process because they're already almost being vouched for, so it's a lot easier to kind of get in there.
Yeah.
And I went to a referral business guy that runs this. His whole business is on how to get referrals. Right. And one of the things that was very interesting there was that he doesn't use the customers as his referrals. He actually gets other people that are associated with those clients to be his referrals, and he trains them on his business and rewards them accordingly. So, because the biggest problem is if you go to a business owner or, like you go to a client and say, hey, tell you what, if you give me another client, I'll give you money or I'll do this, whatever. And it feels, right? It feels like, oh no, I'm sort of like trying, because if they don't refer me, then they're not happy. So I'm asking them, I'm trying to force this thing to actually get them to refer me, and then it could actually impact on your business. Sometimes I've seen situations where you do that and they run away, they stop dealing with you because they've got a bad taste in their mouth there because it sounds like you're desperate.
Yeah. You got to be careful on how you solicit those referrals. We tell clients over deliver and under promise.
Yeah.
Because too often what happens is, you promise the world to your client for the referral, or
all you get is an atlas. That was usually just to say, probably give them an atlas.
Yeah, or if you're a new startup, you're so desperate for that. Especially if you work in a business that's, you work under contract for people. You'll always overpromise. Oh yeah, I can do that, and then you're going home on YouTube trying to figure out how to make whatever it is happen. So
absolutely. I think that's a danger, is that, if someone's expectations, I think expectations is the killer of almost anything. Whether it's a job expectation, someone comes along and got these high expectations because they were promised all these things that never eventuated, and never was going to eventuate, so essentially got lied to.
Well, you got to manage that.
Yeah, well, you promise this client this massive change, and sometimes like little promises are actually better than big promises. Sometimes it's like, well, we'll get there with this and that will actually perhaps make a bigger difference.
Exactly.
And so it was kind of interesting with the whole referral thing, but it was like you would go to your potential people that were likely to see, like an accountant, for example, might be dealing with a business. So for us, we actually went after accountants. So we used to talk to all the accountants in the business and tell them about the accounting software we sold, because they would then refer their client. And we had one accountant that gave us 20, 30 customers over the period of time and never asked for a single cent, because his motivation was, if I can get my customers working better and their financials they give to me are better, so they're all the same, I win.
Make my job easier.
Hey?
Make his job easier. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, make his job easier. So sometimes it doesn't have to be money that you give them. Sometimes it's just the process is rewarding for them, but looking for the people that are actually around that customer rather than the actual customer. And then he'd have training with them as well. Like, he'd have talk to them and train them up. It was almost like commission-only salespeople. And so I think there's a danger, and I've seen that myself too, with referrals, is that you get lazy because you get these referrals. You don't market, and then what happens is the referrals dry up, because oftentimes it's only that window of opportunity with referrals. Typically, like they're usually in the early days when they're quite happy. Once they're inside the business, it almost doesn't seem as good, so they don't refer you as often. And so I found that early kind of relationship was where the referral was. But I think at the end of the day, it's like it's a great way to get business. It's a nice way to get business, but without a system or without a strategy around it, or another alternative, like another pillar of marketing, you can be quite risky, because your referrals can dry up suddenly, and then you go, okay, I'm going to learn to market now. Right, that's what happened to me. I was actually running an IT business that actually we were getting 100 leads a week, and I had to do nothing, and then they went broke, and that was it. I then had to learn how to market overnight, because no customers coming in the door anymore. And I had to do nothing for those customers. They were cheap as.
Wow. Yeah, and that's another thing we go over. I mean, I think there's one of two things that can happen in a startup, and that's, you you hit the ground and you just take off like a rocket, or you're trying to gain traction. And for those who take off like a rocket, we tell them, things are great, but you look to the future. And like you said, you've got to be looking for those other streams of bringing clients in, or however, whatever your business does. You've got to be looking for that next client, that, those new sales, and not just rely on the fact that it'll continue that way. You've got very few businesses that can continue that momentum unassisted.
Yeah, it's almost like, you now got luck coming into the game, like pure undated luck.
Yeah.
I guess in some respects, to me, like taking a client on is like hiring an employee.
It is.
And I have some scenarios where we don't take clients on because they can't follow instructions. Right? It's like, I want you to do stuff. If I can't get you to do stuff early on, and this is kind of my litmus test a lot of times, is if I can't get them to book an appointment, show up on time, and do some little things, I will never get them to do the big things. So save myself some pain and suffering. Don't take them on as a client in the first place. I mean, I had a client I tried to fire a couple of months ago, and he wouldn't leave. It's like, I'm going to charge you more money. He's like, I don't care, I'll pay. I'm like, I don't want to pay. I want you to. I said,
I want you gone.
You're fired, right? And he still won't leave me. I've still got him.
Hopefully you can educate him somewhat so that
unfortunately it's a short-term project, so hopefully he can we can just, so we'll do the best we can in the circumstances, but it to me it's like, if you pay someone, you pay to pay attention. And I think if you're not charging enough money, which I thought, if I increased my price, it worked because he paid attention.
Yeah.
Right? And then that has that conversation, and he asks himself, can I afford it? And he's doing a good job anyway, I want him to finish it. And so it wasn't a case of grab for more money, but I just said, dude, the amount of work you want to keep changing things here is going to cost too much. It's not effective. It's not worthwhile. You're wasting money. You'd be better off doing it just a different way and saving some money. I don't want to take your money because it was going to too much work. And he goes, no, I want you to do it. It's like, well, okay, but just so you know that. And so we threw in some extra valuable stuff, like $3,500 worth of extra stuff, because I felt like, but at the end of the day, you're not getting value for that. So we actually gave them we have run bestseller campaigns, and so we gave them a bestseller campaign because we felt that was, at least an add value they came out with. So I think sometimes you got to look at that, and you really are employees when you're hiring customers, I reckon.
And like employees, sometimes you have to know when to just say, we'll pass. This may not be a good fit, and I think going in saying, well, we're going to assess whether this is a good fit for both of us.
Yes.
I realize that you are hiring me, but this has to be a good fit for both of us.
And firing too. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you got to be prepared to fire a client too.
Yeah, absolutely.
My attempts at fire clients, the first client I've ever fired that wouldn't leave, right? Like normally when you fire clients, they've had enough of you, that's it. But this one wouldn't leave us. So I think at the end of the day, obviously he was happy with what we were doing. It's just like, he didn't know. And that's an interesting thing too. I think just because a staff member is doing something wrong doesn't mean they know they're doing it wrong, and no one's drawing it to their attention. So what's happening is that they're just doing it without realizing it. They're not aware of it, and a lot of people aren't self-aware necessarily about what they're doing around them.
Very true. And to that point, I think another important point for startups is, make sure you've got someone properly. If you're not training them, make sure you've got someone who's properly training them. And I tell clients too, I continually recommend digital employee handbooks because they can be updated much easier than print.
Yes.
And every learning scenario should go into that handbook so that you know what to avoid, and make sure that they're giving you that e-signature and you're protecting yourself at the same time.
We used to have an old saying that we used to have, like, if you train them, what if you trained them and say, what if you didn't train them and they stayed? Right? No, and it's like, well, hang on a minute, that kind of reverses it, because if you train them and they leave, so I train them and they leave, that's what I'll train them up and they'll leave me. So what if you don't train them and they stay? What sort of damage are they going to do with no training?
Well, hopefully you'd find out just before they have a chance. But yeah, it's certainly always a possibility, because there are those people who are just taking a job just to tie them over. and they're always looking for another opportunity. And those people who are bouncing, you've probably seen resumes of people who've had, 3 or 4 jobs a year and continue to do that for an extended period of time. Those people kind of freak me out.
And I think the biggest problem here is, and I read somewhere where they said that the generation, like the 20-year-olds now and younger, they could have up to 30 to 50 jobs in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm reading this book, this guy wrote, I think, Brief History of the World or something, the latest book, can't think of the name of it, but it's a very interesting book, and it talks about the fact that as technology improves, people's jobs will move. So you'll move from being completely different, like you could be a cleaner in a shopping centre today, and you could be running a highly sophisticated engineering task in some sort of drone facility or something, right? And so what's going to happen is that you're going to have a situation where you're going to have someone going completely to a completely different job, and the biggest problem then is that they're going to move from one skilled job, let's say, or unskilled job, to a skilled job with no buffer in between. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have a situation where where's the money come from? So the idea that in the book was that the government should actually pay people to learn and give them their wage while they retool, because the biggest problem is going to be is these people are just going to become useless in society, homeless, useless, and that's a big problem. So at least we used to do in our businesses, we trained the hell out of them, because what would happen is often I would see a staff member leave, and I've got one staff member that started on the early days, and we spent a lot of time training her. She runs 60, 70 staff. Actually runs more staff than I ever did, right? And you look at that and you go, wow, she started and she used to cry at work. Like she was young, and the littlest thing had set her off. And she was living out of a car, I found out later. And it's like, we took her from that point and we trained her because we could see that she had talent, she had ability.
Right.
Train her for her to leave and get a better job. So sometimes, even if you actually it's almost like they're going through your business, but right. you get to train them really fast, get them up to skill, get your money's worth out of them, and then if they move on, great, look what I've done. You've actually trained someone up to actually be better, and I think that's not a bad thing.
I completely agree. I've trained employees that you realized once you trained them, they were enjoying themselves, but they had that training and that nurturing kind of brought about an ambition within them. And if they had an ambition and brought something to me and they thought, well, I'm thinking about this, because I've had countless employees talk to me about wanting to do something else. And I would never want to stifle someone's dream. So yeah, if you're training an employee and suddenly they can see themselves moving, above and beyond what you trained them for, don't be that person that stands in the way.
Set them free. It was actually interesting because when I was running the software business, we had a reseller, and we had a situation where the staff member that was working for us was driving us nuts. Like, he was just totally useless to us. Like, it was like, I'm going to fire this guy. And at the same time, I'm talking to one of these resellers who's talking about a staff member who's driving him nuts. And I asked a few questions. I thought, let's swap employees. So we actually swapped employees. And both employees just blossomed.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Like, it was almost like they were both in the wrong jobs, yet they were doing the software. One was supporting, resellers and customers in a software environment, like a main software supplier environment. The other was a reseller actually servicing the customer and helping them out. And these guys' skill sets weren't suitable for that. But switching them, they both stayed.
They suddenly found their passion.
Yeah, so
I've never heard that. That's incredible.
Yeah, and the fact that it worked was surprised the hell out of me, right? So I'm thinking, because my motivation was, well, we can bring the other guy on probation, right? And so we can get this guy, make it sound good. We'll get rid of him, nice and soft, and he won't be upset with us. So it'll be nice. Like, we reposition him, set him free. And if we don't like this guy, we'll always just get rid of him, right? It's on probation. And so that was kind of the methodology we went in for. So we never actually expected it to work that well, but it actually worked gangbusters. That guy worked, I think, for 9 years for us. And that other staff member, I think, I don't know, last I heard he was still working for him, and that's 15 years ago.
Wow.
So it was quite an interesting thing. So sometimes your best employees come from your inner circle of the people who come work for you, and sometimes you got to make sure, like in that situation, we didn't steal each other's stuff, which was good. The other guy could come to us and
mutually agreed upon,
because he did want to. So it's kind of interesting, because he had only one guy working for him. So that's the whole biggest problem, is that very first employee, I think, is the hardest hire you'll ever do.
Yes.
And it's the hardest fire you'll ever do if you get it wrong.
I totally agree. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, what's your ultimate goal? Is to get in a corporate environment, and how long you reckon it's going to take you to get to, like, what are you looking at in terms of, do you look at doubling your revenues in the next 12 months, or is it a case of increasing by a certain number of clients? What's your sort of metric?
We're looking at increasing, doubling every year, over year, for the next 5 years. And then at that point, I'll assess where we are and what I want to do at that point. By then I'll have a son probably just out of college, if everything goes right. He'll be starting college in 2022. So that will dictate a lot of, I would like to be a digital nomad. Nice. So that I'm not, so that I can move around,
That's interesting, because my son's 21 and he left school and he's worked for me nearly 3 years now. And that's a legacy business. And so it's very interesting that, and I think it's something that's lost in a lot of people, is that they don't think about their business being a legacy. They either think, most people get rid of businesses, either sell it at the worst possible time because they're sick, unwell, or just had enough of it, or they're going broke, and they sell it, or they don't pass it on. And to me, it was like, I had to see whether, he'll necessarily stick at the job, he'll manage, because sometimes it's like, it's all very well to push your own beliefs on someone, but if they don't like it and they don't want to do it, then, within a couple of years of you actually exiting the business, they're going to just tank it, right? Like, that's the end of it. And the second generation can be really good, and the second generation can be really bad. Like you see
a lot of that.
Yeah. Because my nephew did that. He took over his father's business, and that business went, his father was just a small delivery business, and he went national with that thing over in generation. So to me, but he taught him, and he obviously knew that ultimately that he could take the business on.
It would be good, to have someone who actually wants to do that and then sees the vision that the company can head towards. And that would be great. But for me, support him in everything he wants to do. But to live out that bucket life list, travel and see the world, and
I don't beforehand.
Exactly. When you've had enough relatives who you realize that they didn't live the life they wanted to. There's nothing sadder than, coming to the realization that there's so many things I didn't get to do. I'd rather look back and go, wow, that was awesome.
It's quite interesting, actually, because I did an interview with a guy on another podcast, Evolvepreneur, and he's a life sort of coach and sort of fitness coach, and he pulled this book out, and one of the things of the book was what people say on their deathbed, right?
Yeah.
And no one ever says on their deathbed, I wish I had spent more time at work, right? It's not like they're going to say. But one of the biggest ones was allowed yourself to be happy more.
Yeah. And I think that's where people are missing it. People are, I don't know how society got to this point where it's all about the rat race and how much you can accumulate. But too often I think we miss, the small things. If I decide to follow my son just to hang out, maybe. But again, to continue taking those trips, I realized when he was small that, my parents weren't big on vacations. So, when he was 3, we decided to take him to Disney World for his 4th birthday. So we flew in, he was 3, got there, he turned 4, and made sure that he had the big Buzz Lightyear cake and the balloons and all of that, and continue to try and just do small things that I think as a family bring us closer together. And when you think back on them, you just have fond memories. And again, just those things that you look back, and I've had family that, you brought up the book On the Deathbed, that look back and sincerely wish they'd done more with their life. Yeah, so
and I think that the old story is you seriously overestimate what you can do in a year, but you underestimate what you can do in 10 years.
Exactly. And who knows in the next 10 years where we'll both be.
Exactly right. And I think it's important to understand that I think the world has changed. Like this whole concept of working a 9-to-5 job and that's the solution. I think one of the things that this pandemic has sort of brought out is that it is possible to work at home where we used to work before industrialization. It's possible to do things that you didn't think was possible at home. And I think that to me is a great shift in mindset to allow people to think, well, hang on a minute, I can pivot. Because to me with startup, like I get a lot of people come to me and say, I don't want to be in the show because I've been in business for 5 years. I'm not a startup. I said, but generally speaking, when you pivot or you start restarting things quite a lot. So if you've got a startup mentality and you understand how to start something fast, that's a lot better than saying, well, because some people have been in business for 10 years, but they've only really been in business for a year. They just do the same thing over and again every year, right? They've never learned anything new. They're just basically just repeating that Groundhog Day scenario. And so I think, having that, be able to start something, particularly in this environment where suddenly, retail and even tourism is completely tanked, you've got to look at that and think, well, how do I change that without scaring the hell out of my employees and having them leave because they think there's no future in it?
Yeah, and that's some of the things we're trying to address. And I think, one of the things that Gallup poll just did an almost 200-page study. Some of it is it's an aha moment, but then a lot of it is incredibly obvious. I think for the last 10 years, you've heard people talk about work-life balance. Well, that's kind of, frog leaped over a few other issues. People want to lower their stress levels. So I think the travel industry, when things are finally back to normal, is going to be one of the biggest industries we've seen in quite some time.
We'll come back stronger and harder and very different, I think.
Yeah, and I think people, are going to start traveling to places that they've never thought of, and companies that are positioned for that are going to have their best years ever. The other thing is alleviating stress. I think, we talked about retail, but spas and some other things. If you've got a product that can help people alleviate their stress, whether it's life coaching, whether it's a spa, whether it's travel, whatever it is, that's going to be another thing, because in the Gallup poll, it puts that, I think it jumped to employees rating, their stress levels, at almost 80%. And that's up from 60 some odd percent. So I think that's going to be another key thing that if you're in that industry, you're get into if you've got you keep saying pivot, but if you're capable of pivoting, you're going to be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential. I think if you keep your eyes open, I think there's a lot of potential, and a lot of very highly skilled people, like in your situation, like, you're taking skills you've got and turning into a business. I think there's a lot of potential there for those really well people to actually make a bigger impact than in their own, as an employee ultimately. So really appreciate your time and talking about this. I think it's quite a very important subject, and it's something that I think people, as you say, they don't probably think it out well enough in terms of hiring people and firing people and who to fire. So I think it's a very big subject right now. I really appreciate your time. So if someone wants to get hold of you and have a conversation, what's the best way to do that?
They can go on to holisticcoachingsolutions.com. They can find me on all the social media outlets, either under Roderick Mason or under Holistic Coaching Solutions. So I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Clubhouse.
Fair enough. Clubhouse is an interesting platform. Okay, cool. So we'll put up the links and everything on our site as well. So, if you can't remember it, you just click on the links. So again, I really appreciate you coming along and thanks for the convo.
I sincerely thank you for having me. It's been great.
That's a wrap on another awesome episode for the Startup Secret Show for entrepreneurs. Just before you go, if you like this episode, we'd be very grateful for a 5-star review. Please also consider recommending the show to a friend or two. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes at startupsecrets.show right now. Until next time, if you're an entrepreneur, make a start on your next great business idea today.